Hi and welcome to my studio. My name is Linda Bratten. I am the owner of Linda Bratten Creations, and welcome to my studio. We are here today finishing up or adding the binding by machine on our pumpkin spice Quiltober free motion fun project. All I've done so far since our last time together is I have gone through and heat set my fabric paints, and then I trim this down to a nice square. I'd love to be able to tell you that it is 14.5 or 13.5 by 13.5, but all I did was try to retain as much of the painted background as I could with keeping the pumpkin somewhat centered. I fell in love with the watercolor effect that I did in the background, and I did go back, and I don't know if you can see, I did highlight some more of the pumpkin and add some more swirls using just a gold and a silver metallic paint. And I think I just added just enough to make it look like there was some frost on the pumpkin. So this pumpkin spice is going to be one of my morning pumpkins in this fall. Now, what I'm going to show you today is how I prep my binding and how I get it ready. And I have chosen this bright, fun stripe to go with my pumpkin spice quilt. It probably wouldn't be everybody's choice, but I like the way that it pulls a lot of the colors that are in my painted surface, and I think it's going to be kind of fun. I also have an ironing pad here so I don't ruin my table. I have my sewing machine set up with some polyester black thread, and I'll talk you through it as I do this. Now, I did go ahead and cut a 2-inch wide strip that was the width of my fabric, which would be at least 40 inches. I also went ahead and cut 2 of those strips, and then I went through and I mitered them. Now, when you miter a stripe, you want to roll back a section of it and then match the actual stripe on this. And I don't know if you can see this, but I've tried really hard to get the stripe so you can barely see where the miter is on this stripe. And I'll just open this up. And what that does is it kind of makes your, by mitering this, you actually continue the stripe, and individuals find it very hard to find out where you have started and stopped. And I do use a note card then to stitch on that 45-degree angle, joining my 2 pieces together. I went back to my iron and I pressed it wrong sides together. So then now I should have, since this is a 2-inch wide strip, I should have a 1-inch wide. That's where I'm going to begin with today. Now, when it comes to doing a machine stitch binding, I do like to stitch mine on the wrong side of my quilt. This is the back side of my quilt. And why I do that is because then I'm going to roll it over and stitch it with the decorative stitch on the right side of my quilt. And I'm going to just go ahead and take you through the process of how I like to do this. And one of the other products that we're going to be using today when it comes to our binding is some Elmer's washable no-run school glue. I'm going to demonstrate my no-pin technique on how to do this, and that is just one of the products that I use. Now, I am going to start this with an abundance of the strip. Probably, since this is a very small piece, I do like to leave probably about a foot on a large quilt where it's going to be loose. So I'm going to probably start mine, this is not quite a foot, but it's going to give me plenty of play and wiggle room and lots of space on a straight angle. But I'm going to go ahead and start right about here. I'm going to do a little bit of a back stitch. I will be stitching this on with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. And when I get to the corner here, I'm going to stop. And I'm going to use my my patchwork foot for this purpose. And what a lot of people don't realize when it comes to a patchwork foot is there are registration marks. So on my patchwork foot here, you'll notice that I've got a indentation here right where my needle should justify in the center of the foot. Then I have another tick mark here, and this from here to here is going to be a 1/4 of an inch. There is also a similar tick mark on the back side of this foot. So here's where my needle goes in. this mark here shows me 1/4 of an inch behind my needle. That'll be helpful when we do the pivoting of this. And what I like about this foot is that I use these measurements. Now some patchwork or 1/4 of inch feet will actually show you 1/8 of an inch. So you can do a lot more with those feet. But I want you to be able to use your foot to your advantage. So I'm going to start, like I said, right about here, just to give me plenty of wiggle room. This is the back side of my quilt that I am sewing this on, and I'm going to start by doing a little back tacking, sewing a few stitches and then reversing it just to keep it in. Now I have it at my default stitch length, which is about a 2.25 on my machine. It is a straight stitch, and I have black thread in the top and black thread in the bottom. And I'm just going to go ahead and sew to my corner, and when I get 1/4 of an inch away from the edge of my the finished edge or the cut edge of my quilted piece, I will stop. Oops. And I don't know if you can see this, but I just went ahead and stopped 1/4 of an inch right here based on that tick mark on my presser foot. I'm going to put my needle down, and I'm going to pivot to do a 45 degree angle stitch off of my corner. I'm going to bring this up and trim. Okay, so I don't know if you can see that, but I have stitched 1/4 of an inch away, pausing right here. This is the edge of the quilt, 45 degree, and stitched off. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to pivot the quilt, just like I'm going to turn it. I'm going to fold, of course, my binding straight up so that the raw edge of my binding is flush with the raw edge of the cut quilt. This creates a 45 degree fold here, and I'm going to bring this straight back and have it come down just a hair, and I don't know if you can see this, just a hair shy of that raw edge. What this does is this is going to help my my binding turn around and be square. I'm going to reinsert this so my needle is 1/4 of an inch from this side that I'm going to be stitching down, and 1/4 of an inch using that mark on my presser foot from the back of the quilt. And then I'm going to start stitching a few and do a little back stitch and continue on my way. Okay, got to the 1/4 of an inch. I'm going to lift my presser foot, pivot to that 45 edge, and just stitch off. I'm going to complete this around all 4 sides of the quilt until I get back to where I start over here on that edge. So once again, fold it straight up, bringing it back just short, not going over the edge at all, just bringing it back just slightly shy. And then starting 1/4 of an inch from that edge, that corner. Okay, this is our last edge, and we're going to stop. Oh, we want to give ourselves some work space. I'm going to stop right about here, right about this line, right about there. and I'm going to backstitch. So to bring the binding around the front and to get it secure so I can use my decorative stitch, I'm going to do a couple of things. First off, I'm just going to reach over here and get my iron. And this is the actual joining side, so I'm going to do that last. But what I like to do on the first one is just take the iron and I'm just going to press my binding up. This just helps it to lay nice and flat. And then I'm going to pivot it over. In fact, bringing it around. So to start here, I'm going to take my school glue. Now, if you have any kind of chemical sensitivity, I probably wouldn't do this. I would just use standard pins. But what I like about this method is that it gives me a secure edge for my binding to come around, be secure. I don't have to use pins, which can distort the binding and the area of the quilt that I'm sewing on. And what I do is I get myself a real fine line of glue. And I'm just seeing here, oops, opening it slightly. Now you may need to get if you have a heavy hand with your glue, you may actually need to get a fine nozzle. That will help you in your endeavors here. And I'm just giving, probably about 6 inches worth. And what I'm going to do is bring this around so the folded edge of my binding lands just on that stitched line from where I stitched my binding on. And then I'm going to dry the glue using my iron here. And that is my cat Rudy, who wants to be famous. Okay, and when I get that glued, then I'm just going to continue on here. Just adding a small line. Oops, that's way too thick. Don't want to do that, so I'm going to probably just spread the love. And just give myself a real fine line. And I'm only going to work about 6 inches. Because it does dry quickly. And then I'm going to take and roll my binding so the folded edge of the binding is just meets that black stitched line, which is my joining line of the where I sewed the binding on. I'm just going to bring it right up to that black line. And then I'm running an iron over it, and what the iron does is it dries the glue and holds the binding in place for me. And I love this because what this does for me then is it enables me to stitch on my binding and not have any kind of distortion from pinning it. It also helps me to feed this through fairly quickly. It is a starch-like, oops, that's probably too thick, so I'm going to spread that out here, share the love. It is a starch-like product that actually then gives me a little stability, almost like a stabilizer as I'm running this through my sewing machine. And once again, I am just rolling that right up to that stitched, that prior line of stitching. I'm not going over it because on the back side, if I can stitch right on that line, what that does is it hides it on the back and it will be the same starting point as it is on the front. And I'm just here going all the way to the end, and when you get to the end, you're going to have a little bit of a 45-degree angle flipping it up. And I'm just going to come back and make sure I get that glued down so nicely. And then we're going to take it around. Once again, we're going to press it up. In fact, you could have pressed all of your bindings up at the same time. Sometimes when you have a big quilt, though, it can be a little bit much to manage getting everything pressed up at the same time as you work your way around. Okay, now sometimes what I need to do is I'll need to have a pin here to help hold the corner, but I am going to add just a little bit of glue here in the corner. And this is kind of thick. I'm going to spread it out. Now this washable glue will wash out if you block your quilt when you get it saturated, it will go away, or the first time that you launder your quilt, it will go away. So the fact that it is removable, it is a product they've deemed safe to be used in schools. I like that. So there's not much I can do to harm myself. And that's what I like about this. And it works so very well. All right. Now sometimes when I turn the corner, like I just did there, I may actually have to insert a pin and hold it like that on my ironing surface and then heat set the glue and make it stick. So I can just pivot the corner, but this one seemed to go ahead and just move right along and with no worries, no troubles. I like that a lot. Once again, we're just going to add a little line of glue. This is a very thin line of glue. We're just considering this a temporary hold until I can get it stitched down with my sewing machine. But once again, I don't know if you can see, we're just meeting the fold of the binding on that prior line of stitching, right up to it, not going past. And then giving it a good press all the way across. Oops, looks like I might need a little bit more here on the corner. Sometimes you have to reapply. And the neat thing about the Elmer's glue is if you don't get it correct, you can actually lift it up, remove it, re-glue it, and reset it down. Okay, so how do I finish the last bit? Once again, I'm going to flip it over. I'm going to press up on my binding here. I'm going to press up on this side too. Okay. What I like about this technique is that it seems to work for me every time. So I like that a lot, that I don't have to finagle things down. Now what I'm doing here is I am just folding this down a 45 degree. I've opened it up and I'm just giving myself that 45 degree miter, which means this right here should be a right hand corner. If you're not sure, you can use a measuring tool or like a note card or something that would give you that perfect 1/4 of an inch. And I'm just going to fold it over like this, and then I'm going to press it back in half. Okay, that's my finished edge, and we're going to use that finished edge to get the rest of the binding complete. Then I'm going to take this and I'm going to the other side, and I'm just going to lay it down and go past a good inch past where the other folded side is. What I mean by that is the other side actually has a smaller, it's closer in. So here is the folded edge. I'm just going to go at least an inch. That's a little more, but at least an inch past that. Okay. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to lay my binding down as if I was stitching it down. And I'm going to open this up, this the top part that or the actual mitered part that I folded. And I like this technique because what I do here is I'm just going to add a little bit of glue to where my point goes, and then I'm going to lay this one down. And I hope you're seeing this. So I've just added the glue to the fold where it folds in half, and then I'm going to come along here and I'm going to pull this flat, and I'm going to lay this right on top and tuck that right into that fold. I'm going to bring my iron back here and I'm going to just iron it. Iron it dry. Okay, and then I'm going to take the other part of my miter here and just add a little bit of glue down the side, and I'm going to bring that back around and fold it down. Notice this one doesn't match quite as well as the other one that we did when we sewed it together, but I am going to glue this down. Okay, and I want to give this a really good heat set, because this then I'm going to open don't want to pull it apart, but I want to open it so I can sew it on that pressed line. Okay. So right here, I don't know if you can see, from here to here I have a pressed crease line, and all I'm going to do is fold my quilt back and insert this into my sewing machine. Oops, I got to give myself a foot, and I'm going to use an open-toed stitching foot that has some guidelines for me, and I'm just using a straight stitch, and I'm going to stitch this down right on that press line, that 45-degree angle that I pressed into the quilt. Same stitch length and everything that I had as I sewed the binding on and around. Okay, so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to lay it flat and just check to make sure it's going to fit, and it looks like it's just fabulous. What I'm looking for here as far as fit is, I want to make sure that it's going to lay nice and flat just like the rest of my binding did, and then I'm going to come right back to this. I'm going to open up the glued seam allowance that I did glue. I am going to trim it just like I did when I mitered it on my sewing machine when I was sewing it around, which means I'm going to cut it equal to the flush to the side, and then I'm going to trim it to 1/4 of an inch, throw that part away, and then down here I'm also going to trim this to 1/4 to get the points off, and then I'm going to lay it flat. I might actually press this to one side real quick, and then I'm going to lay it flat here on the wrong side of my quilt and press it once again, because this is we want it to look very similar to the other piece that we just sewed on. Now I'm going to start here where I back stitched and connect it all the way down to the initial back stitching. And I'm just going to trade my foot out again for that 1/4 of an inch presser foot that I used to sew my binding on originally. And I will back tack as I start and stop. We're going to press this up, and then we're going to bring it around to the front using our glue. Now, some may question the use of the glue. Does that not take more time to finish your product? You know what? For the minimal amount of time this takes, it really saves me a lot of time in the end. I'm not having to restitch something, because it is just so convenient to be able to take it right to my machine after this process is done and get everything stitched down and looking fabulous. So no, I don't think it, in my opinion, it's not a large amount of work. It just makes your product look fabulous. And that's what we want, our quilts that look fabulous, right? And since I've started this process like this, using my machine to stitch down my binding, I've actually got more quilts complete. So it has helped me in saving a lot of my work time. All right, let's get the machine set up. Okay, so I went back to, this is my open-toed embroidery. It's a clear foot. You could also use something called an edge joining foot, but notice that it has a big hole here so that you can use your decorative stitches. It also has a metal bar or a guide, and sometimes you can run that guide right on the edge of your quilt binding, and that helps you to stay on track. You do not want to use your piecing foot because it is for a single stitch or a straight stitch hole. So any kind of zigzag or anything like that will actually break your needle, because when it swings out, it'll hit the foot. This is also a standard open toe embroidery foot. Keep in mind your decorative stitches at one time were called embroidery stitches. So I like to use either one of these because I like to be able to see how and where my stitch is going. The other thing that you can use is a walking foot. Now the thing you have to be mindful of your walking foot is you need to use a forward going stitch. You don't want anything that has to go back, for example like a feather stitch, but a buttonhole stitch that would keep the foot moving in a forward motion. What that does is it protects the little gears that are in here that give you that that lift that you like or desire when you are doing a motion of sewing over thick pieces. Okay, so I have my machine set up here. I have it set up for a triple buttonhole stitch. So what that means is it's going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, bump, 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 oh, and then over and bump, bump, bump. And it gives it a thicker thread look because it's doing some double stitching. It still moves forward. It never goes backwards. It still moves forward on the fabric. But what it does is it helps to make my thread look a little thinner, so it almost looks like I do a hand buttonhole. I do, once again, have some polyester, probably I think it's a 30, no, maybe it's a 40 weight polyester thread. And what I like to do is just watch when I turn the hand wheel forward to see how it's going to bite into the piece I'm working on. In fact, I did bring up those threads here. There we go. And I want to make sure that when I do the buttonhole, the stitch is going to go right alongside the binding and just take a bite into the binding, but it's going to stitch right over that prior line of stitching. And that just helps it look really, really fabulous. So I'm going to take a few stitches here. And I have pulled my bobbin thread to the top, but I'm going to have to lift my foot, I believe, and get them passed through here. There we go. All right. Let's get this stitched down. Oh, and another hint is watch the presser foot where it hits your binding. Don't watch the needle. The needle will make you ill. And I'm keeping this buttonhole stitch at the standard factory default. So it's going to work just like it would coming out of the machine. And just notice I'm supporting, I'm not pushing or pulling my fabric, I'm just holding the quilt up so it goes in the same line of you can make the stitches in the same line all the time. I'm just holding it still, basically guiding it. And sometimes at the end here, it actually may be to your advantage to just hold the weight up so that gravity doesn't pull it at the corner. Okay, so I watched really carefully how my stitch was stitching, and I'm going to pivot here so it'll take a bite into the corner as it turns around. Sometimes you may have to adjust just the length to shorten it or lengthen it to get it to look consistent when you use your decorative stitches in the corners. Check out how fabulous this looks on the back side. That's the secret to getting this to look really good, is to bring this around just to that prior line of stitching, but not going over it. Okay. Well, I hope you like this. I'm just going to go ahead and finish this to make this video a little shorter than some of the other ones. But I hope you like my technique of adding my binding on by machine, and I hope you give it a try on your projects at home. Don't forget to put a label on it, and in fact, I will probably put just 2 plastic curtain hooks or curtain rings on the back to hold this up, or I might still use it as a table or a candle mat. I haven't decided. A little slight decoration for my fall theme in my house. But I hope you've enjoyed our Pumpkin Spice Quiltober sew along, and be sure to like and subscribe to my YouTube channel and join the Linda B Creative Facebook group. Let all your friends know about my Linda B Creative newsletter that comes out once a month and is free, and to join our group and enjoy some really great creative fun. Thanks, and we'll see you again. May your bobbins be full.